On a quiet suburban morning, the neighborhood looked peaceful as birds chirped and the sun painted warm streaks across the rooftops. But beneath that calm was a tension that had been building for months between one family and the homeowners association. Marcus and his wife, Angela, had bought their home a year ago, looking forward to a slower pace of life. They had chosen this community for its lakeside view and promises of tranquility, never expecting that the people in charge of the HOA would turn that dream into a nightmare. From the first week they moved in, Marcus noticed the way the HOA board carried themselves. They acted less like a group of neighbors trying to maintain property values and more like a small militia, patrolling the streets, peering into backyards, and issuing citations for the most trivial things. The enforcers, as they called themselves, were a group of men who roamed the neighborhood in golf carts with flashing lights, barking orders at anyone they felt was out of line. Most homeowners grumbled but complied. Marcus and Angela, however, refused to be bullied. Angela had always been outspoken. She wasn't afraid to stand up for herself when the HOA made ridiculous demands, like telling her to change the color of her flower pots or ordering her to remove a small bird feeder from the porch. Every time she pushed back, the enforcers grew more irritated. They had no idea that her husband was a retired Navy SEAL, a man trained to deal with pressure and conflict in ways they couldn't even imagine. Marcus didn't flaunt his past. He preferred to live quietly, letting his garden and his fishing trips occupy his days. But he paid close attention whenever those enforcers circled too close to their home. It all escalated one afternoon when Angela was in the yard tending to her plants. She wore her wide-brimmed hat and gloves, humming softly as she pulled weeds from the flower bed. That's when the golf cart pulled up, carrying two of the HOA enforcers. They were bulky men, always in dark polo shirts with the HOA's logo stitched onto the chest, like they were part of some private security firm. "Ma'am," one of them barked as he stepped off the cart, "you've been warned twice about those planter boxes being too close to the sidewalk. You're in violation again." Angela stood, dusting her gloves. "These planter boxes are on our property. I checked the boundary markers myself. You can't just make up rules as you go along." The man sneered. "You don't tell us what we can or can't enforce. You've got 2 days to move them, or we'll move them for you." Angela crossed her arms. "Touch anything on this property and you'll regret it. I've read the bylaws, and you're overstepping your authority." The second enforcer, clearly annoyed at her defiance, stepped closer. "Lady, you don't want to test us. We're not asking. We're telling you." Angela refused to back down. Her voice rose, and soon a couple of neighbors peeked out from their windows. The tension thickened. The first enforcer's face flushed red, and before Angela could react, he shoved her shoulder hard enough to knock her back into the flower bed. Angela gasped, stunned. Dirt clung to her clothes as she tried to push herself up. "Did you just put your hands on me?" she shouted, her voice carrying down the street. The enforcer took a step forward as if to intimidate her further. "You've been a problem since you moved in. Maybe it's time someone teaches you a lesson." What he didn't know was that Marcus had been inside, watching the whole scene unfold through the living room window. The moment he saw Angela fall, something deep inside him switched on. The calm, quiet man who enjoyed fishing and gardening was gone. In his place rose the warrior he had once been, the man who had spent years in hostile zones, defending lives with precision and force. Marcus opened the front door and stepped outside, his presence alone enough to make a few neighbors pull out their phones to record. He moved with quiet authority, his gaze locked on the enforcers. "Get away from my wife," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that silenced the street. The two men turned, smirking at first, thinking he was just another angry homeowner. "And who's gonna make us?" The one who shoved Angela sneered. Marcus walked forward slowly, his posture calm but deliberate, the way a predator approaches when it knows the prey has nowhere to run. He helped Angela to her feet, checking her quickly to make sure she wasn't hurt. She shook her head, still shaken but steady on her feet. Then Marcus looked back at the enforcers. "You put your hands on my wife," he said evenly. "That was your first mistake. Coming onto my property like you own it was your second. You don't get a third." The confidence in his tone unsettled them, though they tried not to show it. The second enforcer puffed his chest and said, "You don't scare us. We run this neighborhood." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. No, you harass this neighborhood, and I've dealt with men far tougher than you in places where the rules were life and death. You're amateurs playing soldier, and you just crossed a line you'll regret. The men shifted uncomfortably, but the first one muttered, "You think you're tough? Try us." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "You don't want that." Neighbors began to gather on porches and sidewalks, drawn by the confrontation. Phones were recording, whispers carried through the crowd. Everyone knew the law enforcers had gone too far this time, but no one had ever dared stand up to them like Marcus was doing now. Angela, her voice steadier now, pointed at the men. "You assaulted me. Everyone here saw it. You think you're untouchable, but you're about to find out you're not." The enforcers exchanged uneasy glances. They had always gotten their way through intimidation, but something about Marcus's calm, commanding presence unsettled them. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't afraid. And unlike the other homeowners, he wasn't backing down. Finally, one of them growled, "This isn't over. We'll be back." They climbed into their cart, glaring as they sped off down the street. Marcus stood silently, his arm around Angela, as the neighborhood murmured in shock. Nobody yet knew his background, but they could sense he wasn't a man to be trifled with. And deep inside, Marcus already knew, this was just the beginning. The enforcers thought they had power, but they had just made the mistake of waking a man who had spent his life mastering how to deal with threats. The days following the confrontation buzzed with tension. Neighbors whispered about what had happened, videos circulated in group chats, and the once untouchable law enforcers found their reputations starting to crack. For years they had ruled through intimidation, but now they had crossed a line, one that Marcus wasn't going to let slide. Angela was still shaken, but she refused to let fear silence her. "Marcus," she said one morning over coffee, "they can't get away with this. If they think they can just shove me around, what's to stop them from doing worse to someone else?" Marcus listened quietly, his eyes steady. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, every syllable carried weight. "They've shown who they are. Now it's time I show them who I am." Angela looked at him, searching his face. "Are you planning something?" Marcus leaned back, his jaw set. "Not planning. Preparing. They think they're in control because no one's ever stood up to them. That ends now." The truth was, Marcus had spent the past few nights making calls. Old friends from his Navy SEAL days, men who owed him favors, men who respected him, had listened carefully as he explained the situation. They didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss it as some neighborhood squabble. They understood, as Marcus did, that unchecked bullies only grow more dangerous. And these law enforcers had crossed into criminal behavior. By the third day, word spread that the WA board had scheduled an emergency meeting. Flyers appeared on doors. Mandatory community meeting, all residents must attend. That alone told Marcus everything he needed to know. They were circling the wagons, trying to spin the story before it spun out of their control. The evening of the meeting, the community center parking lot was packed. Neighbors clustered in groups, murmuring about the videos and speculating what would happen. The enforcers stood by the door like gatekeepers, arms crossed, glaring at Marcus and Angela as they arrived. Marcus didn't flinch. He led Angela inside, his posture straight, his eyes scanning the room with the sharpness of a soldier entering a hostile environment. Inside, the WA president, an older man with slicked back hair and an inflated sense of authority, called the meeting to order. His voice boomed, trying to command control. "We are here to address false accusations against the law enforcement team. Certain individuals have been spreading lies and slander about our members. These actions undermine the safety and order of our community." Angela shot up from her chair. "False accusations? You mean the video everyone saw of your men putting their hands on me?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The president banged his gavel. "Order. This meeting will remain civil." But neighbors were no longer so willing to be silent. A man from the back shouted, "We saw the video. You can't deny what happened." Another woman chimed in, "They've been harassing people for years. About time someone stood up to them." The enforcers shifted uncomfortably at the growing hostility. The president tried to regain control, but Marcus stood up, and the room fell into a heavy silence. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," Marcus began, his voice calm but commanding, "but since you've decided to rewrite the truth, let me be clear. Those men assaulted my wife on our property. That's not enforcement. That's a crime. The president sneered. And what are you going to do about it? Marcus stepped forward, his gaze like steel. More than you're prepared for. The enforcers started to move toward him, but Marcus raised his hand, signaling them to stop. To everyone's surprise, they did. Something in his stance, his quiet authority, froze them in their tracks. Let me explain something you don't know about me, Marcus continued. I spent 20 years as a Navy SEAL. I've been in countries where the law meant nothing, where the strong preyed on the weak. I've watched men like you use power to control people. And I've watched them fall. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Marcus's words hung heavy, undeniable. I came here to live a quiet life. But you brought the fight to my doorstep. You put your hands on my wife. You tried to scare us. And you thought no one would stop you. But here's the truth. You've been exposed. The neighborhood sees you for what you are. And I won't allow you to touch another resident in this community ever again. Phones were raised, recording every word. Neighbors nodded, emboldened by his defiance. For the first time, the enforcers looked uncertain, their grip on authority slipping. Then came the twist. The double doors at the back of the room swung open, and in walked 3 men in plain clothes. They carried themselves like Marcus did, disciplined, sharp-eyed, and unshakable. They were his old SEAL teammates, answering his call. They weren't in uniform, but their presence was unmistakable. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, spoke in a voice that carried across the room. We've already reported the assault to the sheriff's department. Charges are pending. And if these clowns think they can intimidate anyone else, they'll have to answer to more than just Marcus. The enforcers stiffened, realizing this was spiraling out of their control. The president sputtered, trying to dismiss the intervention. This is private HOA business. No, Marcus cut him off. This is criminal business, and I promise you, the law will have its say. The room erupted into applause, cheers echoing off the walls. Neighbors, who had long felt powerless, suddenly found their voices. They shouted for accountability, demanded resignations, and some even stepped up to offer testimony of past harassment. The enforcers, once so sure of their power, now looked cornered. They muttered threats under their breath, but nobody cared anymore. The tide had turned. After the meeting broke apart in chaos, Marcus walked Angela home, his arm protectively around her. She looked up at him, pride glowing in her eyes. You didn't just stand up for me. You stood up for everyone here. Marcus gave a small smile. That's what we were trained to do, protect those who can't protect themselves. They thought this neighborhood was theirs to control. They were wrong. As they reached their front porch, Angela squeezed his hand. Do you think it's over? Marcus looked back at the community center, where the enforcers still lingered like cornered animals. His expression hardened. No, not yet. Men like that don't go down without a fight. But when they come back, I'll be ready. Angela believed him. And as the night settled over the neighborhood, one thing was certain. The HOA enforcers had no idea the storm they had unleashed by laying a hand on Marcus's wife. They weren't just dealing with a homeowner anymore. They were dealing with a retired Navy SEAL who had brought the battlefield home.